So I'm going to make some new videos talking about Azure and the Azure DevOps or ADO, and also Visual Studio 2022, the latest version of that product. And so I will be making a series of videos showing some of the different processes involved, creating accounts, hooking them up to DevOps, publishing code, and then taking that information that's in DevOps and pushing it out into the Azure environment, like in a Azure web app, for example. And so here I've pulled up the Azure web page. You can see you can start for free, which is what I've done for the purposes of this video. I went ahead and put in an email address, and you have to fill in your name, and you do have to give them credit card so they can validate your account. They don't charge you anything. And so you can see here it is $200 a credit initially, and you'll have 30 days to use it in addition to other free services. So if you've never used the Azure portal, you should give this page a look here. It's azure.microsoft.com, and they go on to explain some of the different things you can do with Azure. And they also go on to explain which things you get for free after your trial time expires. So it's pretty generous what they allow you to do for free, and so you just have to read through this information. And I'm recording this video in January of 2023, so everything that I'm showing in these videos will be for that time period starting in January 2023 for the Azure DevOps, for the Azure portal, and also the latest version of Visual Studio. So here I've opened up a copy of Visual Studio, and right here there is a create new project, so I'll go ahead and click on that. And then the next thing we want to do is create a basic ASP.NET Core web application. So there's all kinds of different options you can scroll through, but for our purposes in this video we're going to pick the very first one, which is ASP.NET Core web app. And then I'll click the next button. So here is where it wants you to give it a name and a location of where you're going to put the code, and I usually keep this checkbox checked. Now I won't actually continue on any further because I've already done this, so I'm just going to close that screen. But that's how you get started and what Visual Studio 2022 looks like in the beginning of creating a new application. And so here's a screen. I just went through that process and created a new ASP.NET application, and I called it YouTube Project Web App 1. And so I will show you how I got to this screen. I right-clicked on the solution and then clicked on Create Git Repository. So next we'll do a quick run of the application, and I can click this green arrow, Start Without Debugging. And so that just opens up this application, which just has a privacy page and a home page. So that's what it looks like, and you can see it's on localhost with a port 7226. So that's what happens when you click on Start Without Debugging. And so the next thing we want to do is take a look at how do we get this connected to the Azure DevOps. And one step before that, I will go ahead and show some Azure DevOps where this code is going to exist. So here I've opened up a web browser and went to this URL, https://dev.azure.com/Mr.Dashboard2. That's the number 2. And so you can see that on the screen here. And basically I've clicked on Mr. Dashboard 2. If I go back and just click on the Azure DevOps, then you can see it just by default selects my Mr. Dashboard 2. Now I previously had created a work item here, and it shows under my activity, and we haven't done any pull requests, which we may look at that in other videos. So I created a work item, which we'll talk about those briefly, and the project. So, well, what is the project? If I click on this YouTube videos, now we're getting deeper into the Azure DevOps or the Azure DevOps portal. And so you can see there's like a project name. Right here in the project stats, we created one work item. None have been completed, and that's in the last 7 days. And the one member is me, Mr. Dashboard 2023. So that's the summary page. You can also create wikis, which we could look at that later. And boards, that's our first work item that I created, so that's where it shows up. And if you have a backlog, like a wish list of items, they can be created in here also. And so you'll see my first item is right here. And if we go back to the board screen, you'll see the Kanban board. And this was the first item that I had created. All I did is click on this new item, and there's another screen also. You can create new items. So that's a high level of the Azure DevOps boards. And then we come to repos. And since I don't have any code in here yet, that's why it says YouTube videos is empty, add some code, which we will be doing shortly. And then pipelines, that's something else we'll be looking at in these videos. How I will go about setting up an initial pipeline and then also doing a release pipeline. So the output of that will be sent to my Azure account, and so it'll be using like a Azure web application, and we'll be looking at some of the screens involved in doing that. So if I click on my next tab here, this is the Azure portal, and that's portal.azure.com, and up in the upper right it shows my Mr. Dashboard 2023 at the domain name where I set up this email originally, and so the free $200 of credits for 30 days is set up with this Azure account. And this is one way to get to the Azure DevOps organizations that we are just looking at. So I'll right click and say open a new tab, and you'll see how it comes to this screen. And then from there I can click on my Azure DevOps organization, which then takes me to this screen, and it's another way to view the projects that you have in your DevOps organization. And I have it set to the Microsoft account. There's a default directory, but I won't be using that in this video. And so you can also open up in Visual Studio, as well as click into the YouTube videos project like we were looking at. So from this page, if I click on this dev.azure.com/mrdashboard2, or I will click on YouTube videos, and it will take us into that project. And this is the same place where we were just looking before. Just wanted to show another way to get to this screen. And here's a quick way to change the theme. I'll change it to dark mode. I usually use dark mode on a lot of things. So now I just hit refresh, and you can see it's going back where it's the Azure DevOps and changing it to dark mode. So I think that's a real quick high-level overview of the Azure DevOps, and we will be working in several of these areas as I mentioned. So one other screen here is project settings, or if we go back to the top level, organization settings. So that's just a way to get to those settings. So if we go to organization settings, you can see here the URL that I had mentioned, and just some different information and settings about your organization. If if I scroll down, you can see there's general settings, billing, users, projects, usage, security that you can set, different process to select, and then pipeline settings, deployment pools, repositories, and artifacts. So there's quite a few different settings here at the organizational level. So here I'm back at the top level of Azure DevOps, and I will click on my YouTube videos project. And then down here in the bottom left, there is a link you can click on that says project settings. And so here you can see the description that you saw on the other page and the name of the project and what process that it's set up for, which is currently set to basic. As I scroll further down the project page, my temporary email set up for this set of videos, you can see that there, and then you can turn on or off the different DevOps services like the Kanban boards or project planning boards. They're here, they're all on by default, and if you want to have code repositories, you can turn that on or off. The pipelines for building, managing, and scaling your deployments to the cloud, that's where you find this setting here, and that's on. Test plans and artifacts we won't be doing too much with in the upcoming videos. And now I'm back on the main Microsoft Azure page, so I can click on the hamburger menu and you can see all kinds of different options that you have. And this again is in my free account that will be free for the next 30 days, and so we'll be using that as we go through some of the different features and creating code and pushing it to the cloud and using DevOps and so forth. So here I've clicked on the little cog for settings, and I went into appearance and startup views and I selected dark mode. So that's how you select dark mode. So when we get a little bit further into the videos, I will be using this Azure and creating resources. So I'll click that button and you can see here there's a lot of different categories between AI, analytics, blockchain, compute, containers, databases, DevOps, and many other things. So we will be taking a look at a few of these categories and setting up some resources to work with our Azure DevOps. So one thing to point out, if you click on DevOps here in the main menu, you'll come to this screen. And let's say we clicked on DevOps Starter. There's a message here saying that DevOps Starter is being deprecated and will get retired on March 31st, 2023. So you probably don't want to go ahead and click that feature. If you click on the link, you can read more about the retirement of the DevOps Starter. So now we're back in Visual Studio. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, there's really three parts to this. There is the Visual Studio part with our code. There's the Azure DevOps portal, which we went and looked at some of that, and we also briefly looked at Azure, which is operating behind the scenes of all of this as far as being able to publish code and run code in a either staging or production environment. So we've looked at most of those pieces, and now we'll take a look at Visual Studio itself. And this is 2022. So here I will right click and then I will go into create Git repository. So here are the settings we saw just a little bit earlier in the video. You can see the local path to where my code is at for this sample project that I created, and the git.gitignore template is the default for Visual Studio. I'm not adding a license template or a readme file. And then you can see the account. That is the account that I hooked up for this video series. And also you can see the organization, which now you should know what that is because we did go look at that previously in the video. And also the project, that was the project name inside of the Azure DevOps. And then we have the repository name, which is the same as this here. And then the last thing mentioned here is push your code to Azure DevOps, and then it shows the URL of where the code will go to. So I'm going to go ahead and click the button here, create and push. And so if everything is hooked up properly, when I click this button, our code should show up where we expect it to in the Azure DevOps portal. So let's go ahead and do that now. Bottom left, you can see create Azure DevOps repository started. Your test will continue running in the background. So let's give it a minute. So now it has finished. You can see down here in the bottom left it says ready, and it shows the master branch, and it shows the name here and path to the code. So now we'll go ahead and pull up the Azure DevOps and take a look in there. So here we are back at the Azure DevOps portal, and so the project name is YouTube Videos, so I'll click on that. And then if we go to Repos, that's where the code is stored. I'll go ahead and click on that. And you may think, hey, it didn't work. It says YouTube Videos is empty, add some code. Well, if I click on this option here, you can see that there's YouTube Videos, which was created by default. And then here is the YouTube Project Web App 1, which is the one that we just pushed. So if I click on that, and here I'll minimize this now, we can see that it just did it 3 minutes ago, 8:06 p.m. Central Time. And we can look at the history, and we can see how it added the project files there as a user called dashboard, and I set that in my Visual Studio settings. And here you can see it's in the master branch, which was our only branch. So the next thing, we'll go back to the code in Visual Studio, we'll make a small change, and then we'll go ahead and push it up here, and then we'll look for the changes up here in the DevOps. So the next thing I did was I pulled up the index page here, and I made a couple changes. I said Scott says welcome, and explain a little bit more about what we'll be doing in the rest of this video. So I went ahead and ran it, and we'll see Scott says welcome, and then a note here about we will be publishing this code to my Azure account, and then we will set up an Azure pipeline and do some basic automation with that pipeline. So there's our changes. So next I'm going to click on the Get Changes tab, and I'll go ahead and put in a message. I edited the index page with a longer welcome message and further steps to take. So let's go ahead and do that, and then click on Commit All. And then I will go ahead and click on the Push option. And it's initiating a push. You can see here it's going to keep running, and then it says you successfully pushed to the origin master. So let's go check out the results of that. So here we are back in the Azure DevOps portal, and I'm still on the repository page, and I'm located inside of our project, YouTube Project Web App 1. And so if I click on history, we will see what I just typed in. I edited the index page with a longer welcome message and further steps to take. And so you can see that it was just committed at 8:14. And if I click into the link there, we'll be able to see the changes that I made and displayed on the Visual Studio application. So now we have kind of gone full circle here. We got all this set up, we got our Azure account set up, we got our Azure DevOps account set up, or Azure DevOps portal, and we went ahead and made a new project in Visual Studio, and we got that linked into our DevOps account. And then we proceeded to make some code changes and push them up here into the Azure DevOps. And in the next video, I will go through the steps of setting up a pipeline down here in Azure DevOps, which we don't have any yet, and also creating a release and sending it back into the Azure portal here. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video, and I will be uploading the second part of this video as soon as possible. If you like this channel, please like and subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified when I post new content.